Hello friends, this is just a quickie midweek video to answer a question I've been getting a lot lately, which is I would like to read some of your fantasy novels, but I don't know where to begin. What is the best place to start? And can you do a video covering what they all are? I thought that I would do this video when I had more of them out, but then it occurred to me this is probably something that I should do annually anyway, because there's always going to be more and there'll be more viewers. So maybe once a year, I'll just do an update of what all of my fantasy novels are. So if you look at the link in my description, I have a large catalog of novels, but the ones I'm specifically talking about here are the Hidden Lands novels. They have their own list if you follow the Amazon link. Most of them are also available on other platforms, except currently The Broken Queen is only on Amazon and on Kindle Unlimited. Most of the books I've written were written to market, to follow trends and tropes and things like that. They're my money makers, but now I'm focusing on the fantasy world that I've been writing about since I was 11. It's been my dream to tell this long, multi-generational story that's been in my head forever, and I'm finally, hopefully, fingers crossed, have made the space to do that. So in brief, my fantasy novels all take place in what starts out as kind of your sort of typical fantasy world. It's not super typical, but it has dragons and it has magic, and the technology level is pre-industrial revolution. So on all the basic notes, it's kind of a standard fantasy world. There are three peoples in general. There's many different cultures within these peoples, but these are like the races as a whole. There's the Miralem, who are telepathic, and they have an alliance with the dragons, who are also telepathic. The dragons are the only telepathic beings in the world. The Miralem lean a little matriarchal. They believe in a goddess. They have a fairly equitable society, however. They've got like elven energy. Then you have the Darmans. The Darmans are not telepathic, so throughout history they've generally been the weaker race. So they've had to find other ways to try to gain advantage over the Miralem, or at least hold their own against the Miralem. So they are a patriarchal society, because one of the ways they've gained advantage is encouraging very high birth rates and outnumbering the Miralem with population. And they've also created the third race, which is the Finarlem. They're kind of like living doll people that are very lifelike and are created basically as a slave race. In ancient times, this world used to trade with our world. Not a lot, but a little bit. They had a portal that they could pop over here and see what was going on, if there was anything interesting afoot, do a little trading, blah-de-blah. And then the portal was closed because of plague, war, you know, whatever bad things were happening. They were like, nah, never mind, we're not getting enough out of those people. They closed the portal and lost track of how to even open the portal, and the Darmans found a way to reopen the portal in the 1880s. So the story takes place over the course of a century-ish and covers multiple generations as they grapple with the incoming technology and culture that starts getting imported from our world and how their world assimilates it. If you're a fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender and you watched the first series versus The Legend of Korra, where they had silent films and cars and things were starting to like modernize in a 1920s kind of way, just that's kind of the vibe my world has, and just imagine that whole thing continuing on across future books so that you get the magical 40s and the magical 60s and the magical 80s, blah-de-blah-de-blah. That's the overview. I have 5 books out currently, and I'm going to tell you what they are chronologically, non-writing order. Any one of these is a fine starting point, in my opinion. If anyone out there has read them all and feels that one of them is a better starting point or is one that you would recommend, feel free to let me know. But I intended all of these books to be a starting point. And generally, that's how I operate. I try to allow you to start wherever feels right to you. But the deeper I get into it, the more difficult this might become. For now, though, we're not too deep, so you could start anywhere. And I'm also using our dates because that just makes more sense. They do have their own calendar, but you don't need to fuss with that. So the first book chronologically is The Broken Queen. This takes place in the 1890s when the Darmans have just started to make use of the technology they've been importing from our world. No one knows that they're getting it from our world. They don't really understand it. And this story takes place in the Dragon Kingdom, which is a very secluded place where all of the dragons live in the mountains. It's cold. And for a very long time, the Dragon Kingdom has operated so that their queen always reincarnates, and they will go find her and make her the queen and marry her to the king every time. She's always reincarnated as a Miralem woman, and it's a great honor to be determined that you are the Dragon Queen. Your whole family can come live in the Dragon Kingdom, and you marry the Dragon King, and then you will tap into the power the Dragon Queen has possessed for centuries, maybe millennia even. I'm sure I sort of say the time frame in the book and I don't remember, which is this like ancient song magic. It's kind of a chant. The Dragon Queen is one of the only people left in the world who possesses the power of ancient magic, which works on different, somewhat odd rules compared to almost all the other magic that's out there. It's kind of mysterious, but of course there's been a problem because that's where the story is going to begin. They can't find the Dragon Queen. And when they finally do find her, it is in the body of a Finarlem slave instead of a Miralem. Finarlem are doll people, so they can't have children, and she's also been raised in the Daramon culture to believe that she is an inferior being and her soul is tainted, and fate has deemed her unworthy to be like a real person, and that's why her soul was called into the body of a doll person. But the Dragon King shows up, and what can he do? He's got to bring her back, and he's got to marry her. He's not very happy about it. She's definitely a fish out of water. And this story really ended up dealing with the themes of, like, if you're fated to do something, is that like a requirement? Do you have a duty to do it? A lot of stuff happens with this group, but it ends up becoming, you know, kind of a found family. Some of them actually are family, but we get a group together, and there's a curse on the kingdom, there's like a blight, there's a lot going on. This story is where I would say to start if you like more epic fantasy. Some of my readers compared it to Mercedes Lackey and Sharon Shin, which is very sweet of you. It's pretty long. I'm still working on the sequel, and it's probably going to take a while. It took me like 3 years to write the first one because this story is like the foundation thematically on which all the other books will rest. So it felt like a lot of pressure. It's more epic than what I usually write. So it was intimidating, and they're not quick to write. But I am faster than George R.R. Martin, so there is that. So I would not recommend it if you don't want to wait for the sequel. Then we have the Cursed Soul trilogy. This one is completed, and the books are The Sorcerer's Concubine, The Sorcerer's Wife, and The Sorcerer's Equal. You can kind of get a sense of the plot progression just from the titles. This was the first series that I wrote in this world. It is also about a Finarlem girl in very similar circumstances, except that she is not the Dragon Queen. She's just an ordinary girl. Both Atora in The Broken Queen and Velsa in The Sorcerer's Concubine are both raised in a house of concubines where they are basically raised to be the companion of a man, like a courtesan, and as soon as they come of age, at least hopefully, some of the shadier houses don't really wait for them to come of age, but we're not writing about one of those. That's too distressing. Velsa is 18, and she expects to be purchased by some Daramon man. It fills her with dread, as it should, but the man who comes in is a sorcerer, and he is more intrigued by the magic that creates Finarlem than he is looking for them for their intended purpose. And he isn't even, in fact, sure if he's going to really purchase one. Grau is from a fairly well-off family, and he's a bit of the eccentric in the family. There is a war brewing, and he has just joined the military, so his father has given him money to buy a Finarlem concubine as a companion at the front because there is this idea that there are Miralem telepathic temptresses on the border that will lure men in and like do terrible things to them. And that if they have a Finarlem companion, they will have their needs met and they won't be tempted to go sleep around. His father's of the mind like, oh, I better keep my boy out of trouble. But Grau is not really thinking of it like that. He is definitely one of the better Daramons out there because I didn't want to write an extremely upsetting book, and he ends up falling for Velsa pretty much at first sight. They're just kindred spirits from the beginning. So the series ends up being spent with them trying to find a way to have a legitimate marriage to each other and to be on equal footing and to find a place where they feel safe and welcomed. And it takes them to multiple locations around the world. This book, I've described it as like the story of a marriage. Like, their marriage is very much imbalanced power-wise, and the book really does deal with that. They have some fights, and Velsa sometimes resents him simply because first he owns her and then he doesn't own her quite so much, but he still has status above her. And sometimes she gets upset at the kind of oblivious privilege that he has. So it deals with those things kind of realistically, or at least I hope it does. There's a lot of sweet slice of life moments to this book, but it also has some distressing stuff in it, of course, because of the situation they're in. And if I didn't mention it, this book takes place in the 1910s. The last book that is out is Doll Girl Meets Dead Guy. It's kind of a sequel to the Cursed Soul trilogy because it is about Sorla, who is another Finarlum that Velsa and Grau adopt as kind of a daughter. She's not really young enough to be their daughter, but they do treat her like a daughter. They become basically a found family. And Sorla was not a concubine. She's very good at cooking. She's very practical, good housekeeper, and a very, very resilient personality. In The Sorcerer's Equal, Sorla meets Prince Selden, the Prince of Lioness, and he dances with her at a festival and is somewhat kind to her and continues to write her letters. So she's had kind of like this idea like, does the prince like me? And then he invites her to come work at the Royal Bakery in Lioness as the book opens. So she's very excited, but it becomes a little more real, like, uh-oh, does the prince really like me? She's not sure she truly wants that when she starts to think about what that would mean, that she is just way beneath a prince, and there is no way that the prince would want her as a wife. But she is ambitious, so she takes the job. She's just got to find a way to get to the capital, which is fairly far away. She doesn't have a good ride there. At this point, the war that was brewing and the Sorcerer's Concubine is raging at the border. And one of the townsfolk has just revived his cousin from the dead who died on the battlefield, Dor. Dor is from the Vendiri people, and the Vendiri people are basically goths. They have a death-based religion, and they dress in black, and they read broody novels, and they're just like fun goth people. They're a ton of fun to write, and if you die in battle or just die in general and you die young, then it's their tradition to bring you back from the dead. So Dor was salvageable on the battlefield, and he was brought back from the dead, but he was in a rough state. He was like right on the border of not being able to be brought back to life, and some of his body parts were harvested from his friends who were too far gone. So he's a bit of a Frankenstein creation at this point, and he is depressed. He's got some serious PTSD and wishes that they had not brought him back. But all he wants to do is get home to Lioness and the family apothecary and his family, but he also kind of just wishes that he wasn't even alive. He ends up giving Sorla a ride to the capital, and as depressed as he is, Sorla is the opposite. She's very cheerful. Of course, she's kind of got this, determination to move beyond her own terrible past. And they end up having a very sweet kind of healing romance. That book is generally very cute, except that it deals with their past traumas. All the bad things that have happened are in the past. So if you like stories that are a little more cozy and you don't want to deal with the intense situation that Atora and Velsa were in, then I would recommend Doll Girl Meets Dead Guy. It's just like a little more lighthearted entry into the series. And I'm working on the follow-up book to that, which is about Dor's sister and one of the other Vendiri men who went off to the front, which I've talked about in other videos. That one will definitely come out this year. And then I'm also working on The Potion Dealers, which takes place in 1969 to 1970. But I'm not really going to talk about those because they're not out yet. I'll talk about those in next year's video about this world. That's pretty much all you need to know. That's just your basic overview. Oh, and Doll Girl Meets Dead Guy takes place in the early to mid 20s. I have the exact year written down somewhere for all of these, but I'm just going off of memory right now. And Doll Girl is the first book where they know that this technology is coming from our world and it's starting to become a little more available globally, but it mostly takes place in the Vendiri district, which is still a quirky place. Actually, all the books are pretty. They have their own culture. They're bringing it from us, but the books are not really, like, this is not like an urban fantasy where it's all just, like, might as well be New York City. They all have their own quirky things going on, their own pop culture and subcultures and cultural movements and all of that. So I think that's it. If you're new here, what a weird place to be in. Sorry about that. If you want to know more about the world, I will have my deeper dive into it linked at the end of this video. And if any of these books sound good to you and you would like to read them, that would make me super happy. And if you want to keep up with what I'm doing, I have more on my Substack and Patreon. Same content on both, and they both have a free tier. Those are also in the description. And other than that, I will see you this weekend with my regularly scheduled video. Bye!